It almost feels like I've come full circle, fishing amongst the reeds with floats that I've made from the same stalks. But I always think there's some special kind of magic about staring at that little orange float tip as it pokes at the surface film. It's that kind of magic trick that can just seem to make an afternoon disappear. And then when it finally does pip away, and that excitement and rush of striking and wrestling the fish to the net, be it a monster or, in my case, something a little less. But then being out and catching fish is always got to be better than being at home and doing the dishes. To finish the floats, I need to start by adding the tips I painted in the previous video to the bodies. For the most part, this is just a case of pushing the tips into position and adding a drop of super glue. If the fit is a little tight, I can spin the tips into place with the hand cranked lathe. This should shave a little of the pith off from the inside. If they're a little loose, I've pre-cut some strips of paper, and these can be wrapped around the tip to make up for any difference in size. This is also a method I use to fit tips to odd size reeds that I can't match up with smaller insert pieces. To smooth the transition from the body of the float to the ends, I can mount the float tip in the chuck and bring the tailstock up to support the other end. For a filler and permanent adhesive, I've mixed up some 5-minute epoxy. This resin naturally wants to create a little dome, and to use it I just need to control that tendency by adding small amounts or removing excess. For tools, I'm using plastic strips cut from the lids of old yogurt pots, and rather than overwork the resin, it seems to respond best if given a chance to recover while I work on the other end. Coming back to it, I can wipe off any excess using bits of plastic bags screwed up. Rather than use the lathe to keep the floats rotating and prevent the resin sagging before it sets, I'm transferring them to a motorised jig I've made. The jig is built around another mirror ball motor which rotates at about 2 RPM. To make it, I screwed together a couple of scrap pieces of wood for the base and then added the motor. The faceplate was cut out square from a piece of 1-inch softwood with an undersized hole at its centre which could be pushed onto the motor's shaft. And finally the front pad which holds the floats was glued into position. This was made from a couple of pieces of 3mm balsa that I stuck together before drilling with a series of holes small enough to grip the float ends. Once the resin has had an hour or so to cure, I can get on with painting over the joints. To do this, I've put a float back in the lathe, and rather than try and hold a paintbrush steady, I'm using a piece of string that I've attached to a specially shaped block of wood and loaded with acrylic paint. With the lathe turning, I can simply press the string up against the float to mark the start, and then work my way along, adding more paint as needed. Despite my best efforts, the slight curve of the reed makes the line track slightly out, giving it a bit of a wobble. For the other end, I can simply repeat the process. To make the block which holds the string, I took a short piece of 3B1 and marked the height of the lathe centre on the edge and one face. Using a 25mm Forstner bit, I drilled out the cup shape on the press and then cut a few inches of twine which I just stapled into position. After giving the floats a few hours to dry, I can place them on a dipping rack and clear coat them as I showed in the previous video. Once the clear coats have had a few days to cure, I can start the final job, making them fit in the eyes. For this I need some short pieces of soft trace wire. To start the forming process, I can fold these in half and then press the ends together. With the lathe jaws almost closed, I can slip both ends in and really tighten up. To make the eye, I'm using a thin panel pin and gently pulling back as I twist up the wire. The untwisted ends can then be trimmed off. To fit them, I've mixed up some more 5-minute epoxy and scraped some onto the wire. Then I can part screw and push them into the drilled bottom of the float. And finally wipe off any excess. I really didn't expect when I had that idea to make some more fishing floats that I'd end up being taken on a bit of a journey. But I can honestly say I've learned a huge amount through that process of making, and also about filming and especially sound with this series of videos. It is fair to say the only fishing floats I want to see for a long while are ones that are disappearing below the surface. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to support my channel, please share this video to Facebook, Twitter, Google+, or whatever social media you're addicted to. For feedback or to ask questions, leave a comment below. To see more handmade fisherman videos, follow the link to my channel, or to be notified of future videos, please subscribe, and finally thanks for watching.